morning to all of you. I congratulate Sujeev, my good friend, chair of the Nepal Economic Forum and convener of this Himalayan Future Forum for this initiative. It's imaginative, visionary, and I hope it's going to roll forward with the momentum that we are trying to create here at this first session. It's an honor and privilege for me to be speaking here at this first plenary opening inaugural session. The theme of this conference is intertwined thematic cluster of 3 C's: climate, connectivity, and community. For me, the climate cluster is the primus inter pares among these 3. The other 2 feed into it as they walk hand in hand, weaving into our lives and existence and survivability not only of the planet we inhabit, but of our own species. I take my cue from the UN Secretary General's remarks at the press conference last year in July, when the World Meteorological Organization and the European Commission's Copernicus Climate Change Service released official data pointing that July 23rd, 2023 was said to be the hottest month recorded in human history. At that event, UN Secretary General said famously, "Humanity is in the hot seat." I continue quoting from him, "Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just beginning. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable, and the level of fossil fuels profit and climate inaction is unacceptable. Leaders must lead, no more hesitancy, no more excuses, no more waiting for others to move first. There is simply no more time for that." And when I look back on those words, for me, it appears that the conscience of humanity was speaking, trying to jog us awake from our slumber. The tragedy is very few appear to be listening. And, a couple of months later, in September, at the UN Climate Ambition Summit, he asserted, "Humanity has opened the gates of hell." And distraught farmers watching crops carried away by floods, sweltering temperatures, sprawling disease, and thousands fleeing in fear of a historic fires raging near the borders. In Dubai, not very long ago, at the COP28, he asserted, we are miles from the goals of the Paris Agreement and minutes to midnight. In fact, I would say we are perhaps less than 5 minutes to midnight. We cannot save a burning planet with fire hose of fossil fuels. And he's saying this at the capital of the fossil fuel world. Are we listening? In my remarks, I will address primarily the first cluster of this HFF 24, the climate, and the seminal importance of the Himalayas. We are now in the very heart of the Himalayas, to say, as they relate to climatic changes of our planet and indeed how they affect us all. The Hindu Kush Himalayas stretches 3,500 kilometers across Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, and it is known as the third pole. We all know how important the polar ice at the 2 poles are. Very few in the world know that the third pole's ice are equally important. And this is disappearing. This pole, or these 3 poles, along with the vast forested areas that stretch across our continents, the hills and the valleys and the rivers that flow, connect the mountains to the oceans. the space that we all inhabit in different places in different ways. This used to be, historically, an integrated ecosystem from which we all were able to survive and which we all exploited, but we have gone to a point where we have disintegrated that ecosystem, and that ecosystem is hitting us back today. All these comprise one holistic ecosystem that have sustained us through millennia, through maintaining an equilibrium between them, governing the variations in the climate through a natural process of balancing airflows and precipitation cycles. The Himalayan glaciers, we know them to be grand, magnificent, eye-dropping in natural beauty. And some of the most well-known glaciers of the Himalayan range include the Gangotri, the Khumbu, the Siachen, and the Baltoro. They help to sustain several major rivers in Asia, notably the Indus in Pakistan, the Ganges in Nepal, India, and Bangladesh, the Yarlung Shangpo in Tibet that feeds rivers in China, as well as becomes the Brahmaputra river coursing through Bhutan, India, and Bangladesh. And the Salween, the Irrawaddy, and the Mekong in Myanmar and Southeast Asia. They provide nearly 2 billion people with drinking water and irrigation systems used for farming. A quarter of the planet, in short, depends on the Himalayan glacier for survival. They are important not only because they provide fresh water for drinking and irrigation systems, they can also be used, if we decide to do so, for harnessing hydropower. We have in this region, the BBI region, perhaps 200 gigawatts or more of hydropower, but nobody is tapping it because we can't cooperate with each other. If we were to start hydropower projects today, perhaps in 10 to 12 years' time, we would be able to move away from fossil fuels to clean, green, renewable energy. There is money also in the environment if our entrepreneurs and industrialists and energy houses that are profiting from fossil fuel decide to shift their investments. And they are doing so in other countries. I don't understand why they are not doing so here. If climate change is to take the Himalayan glaciers under with them, it could prove extremely problematic for multiple countries in Asia, not least among our own countries, which is one of the most densely populated regions in the world. All scientific data in recent decades point to an alarming decrease of all these three ice poles. The glaciers in the Hindu Kush, where we are melting at an unprecedented rate of and they could lose between 75% to 80% of the volume by the end of the century. That's just a blink of an eye. It would result initially in dangerous floods, the glacial dams bursting. We would have a lot of water which we can't cope with, and then the waters would disappear. That is the specter that looms before us, and it could happen anytime unless we all cooperate to ensure that that doesn't happen. Current adaptation measures are wholly insufficient. And according to one study, Mount Everest glaciers have lost 2,000 years of ice in just 30 years. Just imagine that. They survived, stood tall for 2,000 years, and in 30 years we have depleted them of so much ice. I could go on and on and on this. The whole purpose of my trying to repeat it is, do we wake up now? How do we address it? My former friend and colleague, the late Professor Salimul Haq, who used to be the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh, in the same university where I'm nested with my institution, was quoted as saying in a report not long ago, In all three pillars of climate action, in mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, we are at a standstill or going the wrong way, while the consequences of inaction are accelerating by the day. Snowfall patterns are increasingly out of sync with seasonality, blanketing pastures and shrinking the grazing land for livestock. Yaks have died due to lack of food in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, leaving farmers with huge losses. The consequences of losing this cryosphere are too vast to contemplate. Unique species are being threatened with extinction. And 14 species of butterflies have disappeared. And butterflies are essential to the preservation of the greenery that helps us to survive. The loss of the Himalayan ice cap has grave consequences as described above, not only for the people of the Himalayan region, but of the plains and the deltaic region and the Bay of Bengal region. Why should Bangladeshis living down below in South Asia be worried? The loss of the Himalayas is going to be a terrible disaster for them. As I mentioned, the Himalayan snow, the ice feeds the rivers. The rivers feed the people, the agriculture, the farming, the activities that these agrarian people do. It's going to result in loss of habitat, loss of income, loss of occupation. It's going to create massive surge in refugees, internal displacements, and even the most efficient governance structure is not going to be able to cope with that. While climate change is a global problem, it is increasingly clear that efforts so far at a global solution in which every player is enthusiastic, a part of the solution is not going to happen at any time soon. But we are all mostly aware that the aeroplane we are going on is going to crash into a mountain soon. As I see it, while many countries, particularly the most vulnerable who contribute the least to carbon emissions, are already working desperately to stave off disaster, but they work in silos. In my view, our ready embrace of the Westphalian model of nation state and state sovereignty and inviolability of borders led to partitioning not only our lands, but the vast ecosystem, the commons that held us together, that enabled us to survive, that enabled us to develop and progress. And these commons, we partitioned, we divided them also into units that each cannot work with on the other. The mindset is hostage, our mindset, collective mindset is hostage to the Westphalian model of hard, impermeable borders that prevent us from working together. I think the best example here is how European Westphalia, which gave us the concept of the importance of the individual and of the nation state, is itself moving away from that. And Cecil Fruman represents Europe in a sense. She's trying to promote regionalism and a sense of working together. They have grown a long way where the biggest nations came together to try and promote European integration. And they have a long history of wars. Here, why are we not able to do it when we are host to a quarter of mankind? That is, I think, what is preventing us. It's a question of how we address these problems and look at ourselves. Do we make enemies of each other? Or do we now get together to work on what we have made our most common enemy? Climate change, the environment, the ecology. Commons that can only thrive and survive and continue to sustain us are dying because ecological integrity that held them together, the mountains, the valleys, the forestry, the wildlife, and kept them healthy for millennia, are now hostage to different versions of resource nationalism. What is mine is mine. It's I, me, and mine. We have to move away from that and think of we, our, and us. I think we lost that a long time ago, perhaps 8 years ago when we entered this new world order. We lost all this. It's time we change that set of thinking, because unless we do that, I see nothing but doom ahead. There will be, how connectivity and communities come together. There are a number of sessions that are going to deal with them. And I think the first thing is, as I see, the new globalization, the next phase has to be a bottom-up process. It has to be bottom-up, it has to be people-oriented, it has to be community-driven. If that doesn't happen, solutions imposed from the top are not going to work. It's the people at the ground level who understand what's wrong, co-opt them, and make them part of the solution. I thank you for your time.